What does fragile ego mean? I wanted to create this quick video because I've been thinking about this concept of the ego. I've been reading about it and I've been really interested because the ego is something that I have really. Let me just switch on the light. I've got too many lights on. The ego is something. Oh, that's better. The ego is something that I have been really battling in my life in terms of getting to grips with the definition of the ego. Partly because religion teaches the wrong way about what ego really is. And because of this, I've created a negative thought process about the ego. When in reality, if you look at it psychologically, and if you look at Carl Jung's teaching about ego and the way he defined it, you got to look at ego in a positive light. But the only way you can do that is if you truly understand what ego is. Now, I'm going to create a little diagram just to show you what it really means. So here we have the ego. The ego is the center of your consciousness. So another thing that Carl Jung was known for explaining was this idea of the self. Now the self, we'll write it here, is actually something that, the way I see it, it protects the ego. So the self includes the subconscious of your mind and the consciousness of your mind. So conscious meaning all the decisions you make, what's going on right now, and subconsciousness is what you think about in your dreams, your thoughts, your memories, your past trauma, and all that. So these two is the self. So the self is the ego and the subconscious and the conscious. The ego, so technically it should be drawn like this. The ego is the consciousness. So the subconsciousness doesn't go into the ego, but the ego goes into the consciousness. So in your life, you have certain archetypes. So Carl Jung talks about archetypes, and the first one I want to talk about is something called persona. Now, have in mind that Carl Jung saw the ego in a positive light. He didn't see it in a negative way, because the ego is what shines a light in your life. It needs to be protected, and the way it needs to be protected is by looking at these different archetypes. I'll write down the other two. So there's two more archetypes, which I'll talk about later on in the video if you stay till the end. Persona is a mask. And we all carry a mask. We wear a mask and we walk around each day, and this mask protects us as well. So this mask makes us kind of helps us excel in society in a way. But there are people out there in the world, as you fully know, is that they kind of make their life their persona. So their persona and their mask is everything. So, for example, a teacher, they can be so into their job that when they go home, they are still a teacher, and they still act like a teacher with their husband. They still act like a teacher with their kids. They don't act like the mum or the dad that they need to be, because the persona has become everything. Now, what does Carl Jung tell us about how we can help, how our persona can help us rather than conflict with our actual self? So the way you do it is you integrate persona with the self, and you integrate it by letting it complement you. So instead of letting it dictate your life, you let it complement you. So you allow it to help you go out into life, live your life, but also remember that this is what's the most important. So essentially, the way I see it is we're growing our self. So this self becomes bigger. Once we incorporate our persona into our life and not make it our mask, but make it our friend, not our foe, but our friend, what happens is this part of ourself becomes our new self. So now what's happening is your ego is no longer a fragile ego. This is important. Keep watching if you're interested, right? Because it gets even more interesting. So the next part, I'm going to move this because I'm going to write it here. The next part is what we call our shadow. Now our shadow comes out in times of stress. So this is something that we deal with, in times of, uncertainty, in times of battling with our nerves and our the stresses of life, really. And our shadow is something that that we've developed as we were kids, but we suppress it, basically. And the reason we suppress it is because we see it in a negative light again. So, but you can also see the shadow as something that is almost like your superpower. It's almost like if you see your shadow differently and you make it your friend again, you build another, it becomes part of yourself. So, how can we do this? Let's think about some actionable steps, how we can make our shadow our friend. You can embrace it. You can literally just see it for what it is and not try and suppress it and cover it. So, for example, when you are stressed and you do start to act up, and for example, instead of being your own true self, you start to, become this gossiping liar and manipulative. You got to see it for what it is and accept the fact that it's there, but not let it dictate you. So again, you know how they say keep your enemies closer than your friends. Keep your shadow closer than what you truly think is your enemy, because that's not your enemy. Now, this last one is actually my favorite one because it's a very interesting one, and it's something called anima. I think it's Latin, and animus. Now, what Carl Jung realized was that in every person, and this is hugely generalized because it can sway in different directions, but in every person, we have contrasexual desires or concepts in ourselves that help us become more human. That's how I like to see it. So these, for example, as a kid, I used to cry a lot. Now that is my anima. So inside me, psychologically, I had a more feminine side, and this is completely generalized. I'm not saying that all women cry. I'm just saying, in society and societal norms, that is not seen as a manly thing, which is, which is perfectly fine. But whether it was because I was a child, I was crying a lot, or whether it was because of my own anima, I truly believe that as a young man, as a young guy, I used to cry more than the average male around me. So between me and my brother, I used to cry more than him. Maybe because I'm the youngest of them, I don't know. But the point is this: everybody, whether you're female or male, in general, you have a part of you psychologically that is contrasexual, so the opposite gender. So if you're female, you have inside you have certain ways that portray male traits in your psychology, and this also is super important because when you embrace that and you understand that that is there and you use it to your advantage, for example, in building relationships, in your career, you will excel, and then that becomes your new self. So, for example, society would tell you, no, you need to man up, or no, you need to be more of a woman. That is stopping you from protecting your ego, because when you develop this part of yourself, you actually, the whole idea, the whole point of this whole thing is to create a bigger self so then your ego is not inflated. Because when you create a bigger self, what happens is your ego cannot dominate yourself. And that is the key thing to take from this video. That is the key thing that I want you to know. That ego will only become fragile when you do not do this. When you create a self that is only contained inside this small box, which is your ego, what happens is all these things, your persona, your shadow, your anima, animus, this is the world caving in on you. And the world chips away at your self, and you no longer become yourself. You become an egocentric, fragile human being with a lot of psychological issues. That is why Carl Jung realized that the ego is very important, and it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. It only becomes a negative thing when everything about you is about your ego. And what's ironic is I'm trying to tell you that it should be about yourself, but we've completely changed the definition. As I've mentioned in the start of this video, we've changed the definition of self, and we've changed the definition of ego, when really the self is protecting the ego. The self is everything about you, your subconscious and your conscious, that will protect that ego that you have in you. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and let me know what you think, because this was a very important video which I wanted to create for a long time. Thank you, and subscribe. Cheers.